This poem is entitled At Risk Youth. Let this pen moan, because my house is not a home, and I can't sing, but I could write you a love song that cries for me. Tears in private become words scribbled on napkin paper. I wish to fly, but how can I when I was born with broken wings? The world is dark, but I can't be the only one. Isn't it darkness you see the stars? So, shine and shimmer like gold and glitter. Don't get bitter, do your best. Let God take care of the rest, to whatever or whoever that is to you.
You just heard Crystal Halliday perform one of her original poems for us. Thank you, Crystal, for being here today. You're a student at UNT right now, and can you start off by sharing your story with us?
Okay. So a number of years ago, about 2, the people that work on this symposium and I were just planning a symposium and talking about how youth's voices never get heard and that we don't get to hear from them enough. So we've had programs at the symposium where we have a youth panel, but we decided at SMU that there was something more we could do, that we could record the stories of youth so that they could be heard after they've aged out of foster care. So the original concept was to just, this is me, not knowing anything, taking the ideas that all these awesome people in here were expressing about having youth voices heard. I'm like, maybe we could get one of those photo booths or video booths like you use at a wedding and do a sort of NPR-ish thing. And then I just challenged the law students to figure it out. And they have done such a fabulous job. They told me, no, it needs to be a podcast. I'm like, okay, I guess I better start listening to those. And they told me, well, we're gonna need to do it this way, and we can have the social media that would go with it in this campaign. And they came up with all the ideas, all the structure to it, and have been reaching out to youth and preparing these podcast episodes for you and other people to hear. Crystal's story, or her poem, is so representative of a lot of what we hear from these youth. They talk about what bad things they've gone through, how dark it was, yet there's something positive that they're all able to see from the experience. I've just been really amazed listening to this. So, like a phoenix rising from the ashes is basically what her poem was about. Just incredible stuff. So many of them have what my students started calling a call to action. They have ideas about what we should be doing to help future youth like them. And so at the end of each podcast, we do ask the youth to give us their call to action. And we're hoping that this podcast will be out there, people will listen, and they'll learn from kids that were in the system so that we can make it better for them. Well, I want to pass it over to Nikki Akavesi, who's a 3L student, and she's been spearheading the project this semester and got it out into the public. She'll tell you about that later. But and here she is in the studio with one of our youth, and I'd like her to tell you about the experience first.
I joined just to be a student attorney, and Diane told us about this podcast idea that she had, and the chief justices in the clinic at that time were really trying to get it off the ground. And I remember going into my first pre-interview we had scheduled with Josie, who you'll hear a little bit of her episode later, and just talking to her about all of the things that she'd been through, all of the physical abuse, the sexual abuse, going through all of these different homes. And at the end, she was like, the hardest thing about all of this for me was not all of these traumas I've incurred, but the fact that I have moved around so much in my life that I do not have any permanent relationships. I have had to endure all of these things by myself. And that just completely destroyed me. To think that, like, well, we all go through terrible things in our lives, but to not have someone to lean on, to not have a support system, I was like, this is really important. We need to get these people's stories out there so that we offer those support systems that they need so that they can be healthy, productive members of society as well. So I just kind of took it over because I became very passionate about it. And basically what we do is we go through various agencies like TRAC or Zoe's Place. We're working with the Ebby House now to find people who are aging out of foster care who are willing to come share their stories with us. And then we bring them in for a pre-interview because my biggest thing is always respecting boundaries. I am asking you to share with us the most traumatizing experiences of your life. I do not want to re-trigger you, but at the same time, I want you to be able to share your story because I personally believe that by giving them this platform to where they can share all these things that happen to them, they feel like they have a purpose and that this was not for nothing. So we sit them down and we have a list of questions that help us guide the conversation, and we ask them to tell us their story. And some people are more open and forthcoming with details of the things they went through. Some people are not. And we always tell them everything that stays in the pre-interview, like, it's up to you, whatever you want to share on the podcast, but tell us now. If there are names of people you don't want to share, we won't talk about it. If there are particular details that you don't want the public to know, we won't talk about it. And then me and whoever else was in the interview will draft kind of an outline and then send it to them for their approval so that when actually we go into the recording, they don't feel like there's any like gotcha moment where we're trying to make them uncomfortable or anything like that. And it's been a really great experience, I would say, for all of the youth who've gone to be on the podcast, because they do feel like, for the most part, everyone we've gone to interview has reached a certain level of stability, because it takes a certain level of stability to be able to even get yourself to SMU and come have a scheduled time to record a podcast. So they feel like they can share their story and inspire other people who are going through the system right now, who can look to them and be like, no, everything will be fine, or at least on the road to fine at some point. And also to say, no, I went through these things and this was so stupid why I had to go through this specific X, Y, or Z thing. This is a very easy fix. We should be paying attention to this.
So here today, we're going to play pieces from 3 of the podcasts, and we group them roughly into some categories that thematically. So we'll play a couple snippets, and then our panel will talk a little bit about how we might use that, because the information they provide us is really helpful for how we can do better for other youth. And we have, due to the theme of the conference, focused on education issues. We pulled out more of those snippets than anything else. So here we go. Behaviors. And each of these will provide some just background information on each youth. They're on the screen so that you could see.
So can you tell us a bit about your experience in school? What kind of student were you?
I always, poetry and writing was always a part of my life, and so was reading. As a youth, it was my escape, learning and all those things. But my behavior did not match my intellect, you can say. So that's the dichotomy that I think a lot of youth and care experience, is that they're full of potential, but they have these issues that get in the way of their progress in education.
Yeah. Did you have to change schools a lot?
Oh, yes, a lot. And a lot of times we look at moving from place to place as a bad thing, or, foster youth are labeled not stable and all these things. But I believe that experience has helped me to adapt to a lot of situations. So I think it'll be important for that rhetoric to be introduce to the youth. And look at your unfortunate situations and something positive that you can gain from it.
Joan did not want her image portrayed, and Joan is not her real name. We respect that, obviously.
Between living with your adoptive parents and moving to the group home, how did all of this affect you going to school or your performance?
Well, actually, I'd always been pretty good at school because, like I said, I didn't get a lot of attention from my parents. So when I went to school, I could shine and be paid attention to. And so I loved school. That was the best place to be. It was kind of a safe place for me to be myself and shine, So honestly, whenever I went to the group home, I was a good kid, and the saying goes that, the squeaky wheel is the one that gets, maintenance. So since I was a good kid, I didn't really need a whole lot of attention, I guess, from the house parents. They're like, she's doing good.
Yeah.
Let's focus on the ones that are having a really hard time, kind of thing. But because of that, I was like, well, I do need attention. So I kept excelling at school, love school, love the structure there too. But, I found mentors and other places that I needed, which helped give me the attention I needed to continue to flourish and grow.
First, I'm going to ask Kristen Bell to comment. Kristen is with Texas Lawyers for Children. She spent a number of years as a teacher as well. And then next will be Lorinda Rothermel, who is a CASA supervisor who also spent time in the education field. Kristen?
So one thing I heard was how Crystal said foster children are labeled as not stable. And one thing I've thought about with foster children recently is why did they get into the foster care system? So we see foster children with instability, mental illness, all of those things, but that's not why they got into the foster care system, right? They were placed there. They were stable before they went there. And so if we it's our job as the adults in the situation to say, how can we reinforce that stability into their lives? I stayed up writing a million notes and my head's spinning of all the things that I want to say, but I come at this from several different places. I come at this topic from the attorney perspective, but a former educator and an adoptive parent myself. And I left education as a second, third, whatever career. I left that a few years ago, and I was in what I would consider a progressive district. And the one thing when we hear about children's behavior in this kind of setting, right, and that children act out and that they struggle in school, and we know just statistically that they are disproportionately punished, isolated, perhaps expelled in worst case scenarios. And what we have to understand is that lack of stability, that whatever's happened to them, has created trauma in their lives. And it creates a completely different lens. And I would say if you are a school counselor, a school administrator, I left 2.5 years ago and I heard the word trauma in a generic sense, but I never learned about trauma. And if you are in a district or have any influence over a district and can teach, or advocate for appropriate training in that district, it will change the school, and it will change how people interact with these children, because we have situations that they run into, right? There's a lack of trust that they come with. There's trauma triggers and things like that. So we have a duty to understand trauma, I feel like, to understand trauma if we're interacting with these children. Because what we do, if we don't understand it, is we see the misbehavior as them just being willfully disobedient, as opposed to what they've learned to survive, right? Because whatever they're doing has worked for them in the past. Lying, stealing, fighting, all of those things kept them safe. So they go into a school system that may look very different than the school system they were in, and those things are suddenly wrong. And people are saying, hey, that's wrong, but they're not teaching them why that's wrong. And I have to say with my own adopted child, who this is now his second year in school, I'm having to advocate for him, like, whoa, we have to go back. He doesn't really understand what he's supposed to do in that situation. So just like you would go back and teach him basic reading, we have to go back and teach him those things and how to behave appropriately. So those are all things we can advocate for these kids, because their experience at school, their ability to make connections at school, their ability to feel safe there is necessary, I would say, to their whole life development.
Lorinda?
Okay.
Sorry,
So
Linda.
I was a volunteer advocate before I became a CASA supervisor. So a lot of what Nikki was saying as far as Crystal not building those relationships and not having anyone consistent in their life, that's one of the main reasons I became a CASA, because no matter what, the CASA gets to be consistent across all phases of that child's life while they're in care. And sometimes even after they find permanency, a lot of times CASA is still there. So we get to close those gaps with the education systems that the kids transfer to. For like, I have one kid who's been in like 5 different placements since I've had him. And we're the only bridge to all those different, the foster care placements and the school, to help them understand, no, this is not just a bad child. They are revisiting trauma every time that they are moved, and just helping them to understand that and give them the supports that they need for that. And the other person I was thinking about, Joan, a lot of times we do have those kids who are quiet, who they are, even though they've been moved from place to place, they still do well in school. So a lot of times people think, well, they must be doing okay, we don't have to worry about them. But they need just as much care, because they're keeping it all inside. And that CASA has, I think, is a very important role, and a person who can help bring that out and give them that positive attention. I see you. I know you're not getting in trouble. I know you're not doing any bad behaviors, but I still see you. You are important, and we are going to advocate for you as well. And another thing, I was listening to this, because I've listened to the clips a few times, and I was just thinking about different ways as CASA that we can help expose them and help teach them those different behaviors and how to communicate more effectively. Especially Crystal, she would get in trouble for her bad behavior, but giving her the attention for showing how creative she is and helping redirect her and interacting with different people and showing her how to handle conflict and things like that.
Those comments lead well into this next topic.
What was the shortest stay you had, and like what was one of the longer ones?
The longest stay I had was probably with my adoptive parents when I was 14. I was with them for a year before I was officially adopted. And then after that, I was with them for 2 years before I was placed back into the foster care system. And then the shortest time, which was after being placed in the foster care system, I was with a family who was just not, they were not a good fit. And I probably lived there for about a month, and then I switched.
What was it like living with your adoptive family?
It was challenging. At first, I loved it. She was my Texas history teacher in 7th grade, and I was finally a place where I felt like I was loved, and there was a family who could care for me, and I wasn't with my brother or sister at the time, so it was just me. And I loved being with them. She immediately took me in after she found out that I was going to be moving again, so she did the classes and filed paperwork for her to become a foster parent, her and her husband, so that they could take me in, and it was really great.
Yeah, and so you could stay at the same school?
Yeah, so I can stay at the same school as well. And then I think just as time went on, I think we rushed into it way too fast. I was only, I think, 13 or 14 at the time. So that's a really big decision to make. To me, I almost kind of equate it with deciding to get married. Like, that's a huge decision. And especially for being that young, I loved them so much, but I didn't know what it would actually mean to like be a part of that family. So as like the years went on, it just became more difficult for me because I didn't feel like I was fitting in the way that I used to for whatever reason. And then after I was placed back into the system, that was when I found out that the parents were having marital problems, which I think probably aided a lot in me going back into the system, because I'm sure they just weren't really sure what to do with me at that point.
Have anyone who you considered a mentor?
Yes, and it will be mentors, or it is mentors, in my opinion, that is the glue or the hope of a foster care youth. And so, yes, I've had many mentors. One of them even made sure that I took a trip to Europe. And I have a mentor now. Let me take this time to, if she's listening, because she will if I ask her to. Such an awesome lady. Hi, Miss Leanne. I love you. Thank you for your mentorship throughout the years. I just wanted to say that. And Miss Leanne is someone that she grew up with me, as far as she's been in my life since I've been in RTC. She's been that consistent mentor in my life. So, yeah, that's very important.
Well, first off, Waxahachie does have this really cool STEM school. It's called Global High. And basically, you have the ability to go there and take a bunch of dual credit classes with Navarro College as a sort of partner, and graduate, yes, with your associate's degree before you graduate with your high school diploma, which was really cool. And at the time, I was actually going to the public school in Waxahachie, but when I heard about this, I was like, man, the classes I'm taking right now are kind of boring. Like, I just spend all my time drawing, and sure, I'm making a lot of cool drawings, but, this would be a really cool opportunity. So I made an application, and, please let me in. And they actually let me in as a junior. And so I completed 4 years of basic, coursework in those 2 years of my high school.
How did you fund college? How did that work?
Okay. Well, luckily for us, we had a education coordinator. Her real name is Gail. She's amazing. She used to actually go to the group home herself, but she grew up to decide that she wanted to help other people just like us. And she had to go through college without any help whatsoever. And she was like, we need help in this area. And so she decided to become that person, which is really amazing. So basically, the education coordinator, what she decided to do is hold little classes. Basically, we had a class for 2 years kind of thing at the group home about what to do in college, how to prepare for college, how to do taxes, how to do budgets, basically everything that you could possibly want to know about being in college and trying to figure that out was what our weekly sessions were about. And it was really helpful and amazing of her to do this.
Did she help you find any scholarships?
Yes, actually, I was looking between A&M, College Station, because they had a really cool animation program there. But she actually said, why don't you think about, UTD? The faculty ratio to student ratio is actually really great. You get a lot of one-on-one time with your professors, and that's really helpful. She had just gotten finished sending another one of the kids to that school on a scholarship, I think. And so she was like, there's also the Terry Scholarship there. And I think that you could get that. It's for people who, are poor, but have excellent grades, show great leadership skills, and if, she was willing to help me with this scholarship and basically find whatever other scholarships that I needed.
Lorinda, your thoughts on those different types of mentors?
I think the most important thing is when a child is depending on us to be that mentor, it's not that we show up, but how we show up. We're fully committed, and that they know. I know Crystal was referring to Miss Leanne. She said if she's listening, but I know if I tell her to listen, she's going to listen. So mean what you say what you mean to those students and the youth. And the other thing I think about is, I know I said it before, but creating those opportunities to help the student explore and figure out their life and just kind of be there for them on that journey, teaching them those soft skills that many of us grew up with, how to talk to people, how to advocate, make a meeting, being interested in drawing. And was it Josie, I think it was, who said she liked to draw, but it was kind of boring, helping her find other opportunities to challenge what she's interested in and just being there for her throughout her career and her journey in life. The other thing I think is really, really important is a lot of times when we think of being a mentor, it's that kid needs us. Many of us sign up for it because we're getting something out of that too. And I think it's really, really important that youth understand, not only do I'm showing up for you, but I need you too. And that's really, really big when they know that you're not just there, because nobody wants to be a charity case. They want to know that you're just as important to them as they are to you. So,
Kristen?
So I love Josie's story because as an educator, you want to take every kid home who's struggling, right? And just make sure that all their needs are met, and then you realize that you can't, and then guilt sets in, you know. So I just love how she expresses that that's not always actually the realistic or the best option for sure. But I think it is important that we recognize that if we hear a lot about placement changes for foster children, and what happens at school, I would say directly impacts that, and how we handle children's feelings and behaviors at school. Because imagine if you're a foster parent and you're struggling at home, and then the school is calling. You know, I'm not saying, engagement isn't important, but the school is calling because things are happening bad in this class, and then another teacher's calling because things are happening bad in this class, and now you're suspended, and we've got to figure out what we're going to do for 3 days with work, and right? So that is when I feel like placements really can start to unravel. So I was thinking through what can mentors do? If we can't take them all home, what can we do? And so I think I just kind of created a quick list. 1, fight for the child to be able to engage in normal activities at school. If you sponsor a club and your child, that foster child may not normally meet the criteria, is there a way to make it work so they can engage and become part of a group? Help the child close gaps, obviously, academically and socially and with their behavior. If you see a learning difference with the child, how they're performing, and then, what you feel like they're able to do, I would advocate maybe for a prompt assessment and evaluation, because these kids move so often that sometimes they get lost in that. One time I taught a group of students who came in from Hurricane Katrina, a 6th grader, severely dyslexic, severely. And it was like in week 2, I'm like, oh my goodness, but he had gotten all the way to the 6th grade without anyone really identifying that, because he had a very transient lifestyle before that point. Work with administrators to respond, appropriately, maybe compassionately to discipline situations like we talked about with trauma. I'm going to give a quick hypothetical. Perhaps there's a child who is holding it all together at school, like I think Ms. Bradley said this morning, and then losing it at home, and you've been working with parent, and then mom calls the school because she found one of your computers in his underwear drawer with no charger. Not that ever happened, and I wasn't like, what? But the fact that there was a computer taken from the school that had no charger, right, meant that there was a reason this child might be taking the computer that did not have to do with stealing a computer. And I loved that situation because the assistant principal fought for kids, and we were all in a meeting that afternoon with the parent, because the discipline matrix, if you work in academics, tells you exactly what you're supposed to do. And he was, going, either to suspension for a long time or DAEP. And we were in there because he was special education, with a manifest determination, and it was our goal that this was due to his disability, and we were going to fix it, And so that is just things that we can do if everyone's working together. There's a lot of campus level, you're told a little bit to do it, but there's a lot you can do on the campus to really work with kiddos. And then finally, I think teaching your child, helping a student develop a plan. Okay, when this happens, if you don't know how to, what can you do? Right? If your teacher tells you to move and you're embarrassed, or you feel like you can't get up, what's the plan? Helping kids think through those, because if they have not had a parent in their lives who did that, they just honestly may not know, and then that is just going to lead to further things. So,
Thank you.
So you're graduating with your major in English rhetoric in December, correct?
Correct.
How did you know you wanted to be a writer?
For starters, my mom, even though she was a drug addict, alcoholic, something she did that was very powerful for me. She used to read to me even at a young age. She was a lover of books herself. And I remember this lady, bless her heart, reading Stephen King to me. And I'm about 5 years old, and I remember just trembling and being scared. But it sparked an interest in me that books can produce strong emotions out of you. And just a lot of instances like that has occurred in my life.
I'm going to play Crystal's call to action because it pairs up well with that.
So you said when you, like during that time, you wrote out your master plan for how you're going to get your life on track. How are you doing now? What are you up to?
I'm a senior at the University of North Texas. What? Go Eagles. And I write all the time. I perform at open mics, and I got a couple of things that I've self-published, some articles and chapbooks of poetry. What's awesome that I'm doing right now is last year I was awarded UNT Research Fellow. And so now I'm assisting in research in the foster care area. We're researching the rhetoric of foster care. So what is the rhetoric or the message that's given to foster parents, to the youth, and even to policymakers? What is the message that's being communicated?
All right. So before we go to the other calls to action, I'd like you two to comment a little bit on what Crystal had to say. I think, I don't know who's first, Lorinda? I don't know.
I think more than anything, especially because she spoke about her mom, and even though she was removed, you can find something good and allow them that space in order to talk about their family members without judgment, and letting them know that that's okay. And the fact that, especially sometimes when you know that the parents had to maybe relinquish their rights, that was something that they did for their child. And helping them celebrate that if that's something, because a lot of times especially our teens, we know once they turn 18, there's nothing stopping them from going back to their family members. And even if they're like 16, 17, they have access, social media, phones. So just making sure that they're comfortable communicating with that so that you can help them maintain a healthy relationship so that they protect themselves as much as possible too. But let's just listen to them and just see what they have to say and what they want to do with their lives, and just help navigate that with them. Not tell them what to do, because throughout their lives, especially if they were in care or age out of care, they've spent their whole life with people just telling them what to do. So just kind of listen and help them navigate through their lives.
Yeah, I think the foster care rhetoric, I think partly there is it's not a right assumption, but I just think it's an assumption maybe we make when a child's in foster care that biological family equals negative or bad and foster family equals good. And to the child, that's clearly not the case. I think if it were a safe home environment, even if we're deeming it not to be at the time, they would love to be home with their family. And so, I think, and from an educator's perspective, you have to know the court order and things, but is there a way to foster those relationships that's safe, And then another thing I would just add, from an educator's perspective, is thinking about, certain assignments I have read kind of that talk about families, that talk about traditions, that talk about things. And does that bring up difficult conversations? Now, I wouldn't say throw those out the window, because they're healthy for 90% of the kids in the class. And honestly, for the kids they're not, if you are well connected to them, it could be healthy too, but I think you have to really know the kiddo. I know we went to open house at my son's school last year, and they had all these family members out. I won't he is African, so they were all different colors, so that was really great. So we got to make a really beautiful family. But it was really sweet. I could see a sadness on his face, and I said, "Do you want to put your mom in here?" And we, so we did. We added her. We added her to the back so he wouldn't be embarrassed, and we linked her little hearts, But just what are ways, and he loved it, But what are ways that if you know a kid and you are connected in their lives, how can you encourage that? And I think educators have educators classes for sure. I mean, they have an important role in building those relationships and really speaking truth, not rhetoric, to kiddos.
I'm playing 2 more clips, and then you'll have an opportunity to react.
Finally, we know that you hope to establish a school program to capture foster kids' information so that schools and teachers can better support them. Can you tell us about it?
Yes. So I didn't decide that I wanted to be a teacher until last semester, and for whatever reason, it just settled in my heart that's what I wanted to be. And being in Zoe's Place, it kind of opened my eyes to see how difficult it is for programs like Zoe's Place to change anything, because it's so hard to get the inside scoop pretty much on public schools. So I thought it'd be a good idea, since I am eventually going to become a teacher, to be able to work with the parents of the school or work with the principal, however, the faculty, to learn who, just like in college, there's foster care liaisons, kind of bringing that program to public schools and private schools with foster children, so that we know who is going to need this help that doesn't have support at home, so that we can help them as they get into high school and graduate from there.
So I just apply everywhere. Luckily, the job that I wanted, which was like a local library, accepted me, and I'm still working there part-time, and it pays for my rent, which is great. And actually, I love the job. It's really, really fun, but at least it allows me time on my other part of my time to work on my true passion, which is 3D animation and making characters come to life.
Joan, do you have any advice for anyone else going through the system right now?
If you don't have somebody to talk to about some of your thoughts that you have, because even now, after you've been through a lot, you're going to have, questions and things you need to talk about. It's okay to go to counseling. It's not a sign that you're weak.
If you could go back to your 10-year-old self and give her a message, what would that be?
Well, actually, a lot of the things that I've done throughout my life was for the little me, I really hope that I can make her proud in most of my decisions throughout my life. And I definitely wanted to turn into a person, that she'd be proud of, and that, she'd be glad to grow into. I want to be the person who breaks that cycle of abuse in my family that's been happening. I want to be the person who takes all that and just uses it as fuel for creating a better life.
Yeah.
I don't want to be another person who is a sad story.
Well, you're certainly not a sad story. You're actually an inspiration.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for taking this time to talk to us and having the courage to share your story with our audience.
Thank you.
Well, we'd love to hear your thoughts and questions, but first I want to introduce the students I have in the room who have been involved in this podcast this semester. Everybody please stand up. Just stand up. Thank you all. Okay, we'd love to hear your thoughts. How can we improve it? What do you think? Can you get a microphone too? I still have to make them work even though they did all this other work.
Did you have any guys come forward to participate?
Oh, you mean do we have any men on the podcast?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's actually, I've noticed, been very difficult to find men who are willing to be on the podcast. We've recorded 2 interviews with men. One, I'm sure you're familiar with Jackie Davis. Yeah, Jackie's on the podcast. And then our first episode, which is actually live on iTunes now, is with Brandon.
Here he is.
So, yeah. so it has been difficult. So if you know anyone who would like to be on the podcast, please email us.
I think it's a wonderful podcast, and I thank you for doing it. I've learned a lot as a CASA advocate just by hearing. And what I would like to do, since I have an 11-year-old foster child, I would like to see other advocates come with me to visit him, to give him hope through what he's been, because he has his low days and he has his high days, but he needs to be loved and he needs to be assured that there is a better life. And until he's in a permanent home, I think those advocates could speak more strongly about there will be brighter days and hang in there sort of thing. And he needs to hear that from them, especially since I'm a woman. Maybe he needs a father representative in that regard. And if you have any advice for that, that would be great too.
I think being creative as a CASA volunteer is very important. I know I had a case, well, this was in Raleigh, North Carolina, but it was a young 9th grader who came into care because his father did a very bad thing. And there was no kin to take him. And he went, and I found his grandmother's best friend. And she and her adult daughters took him in. But, I said, well, what are you doing at the high school? And he wasn't doing, he wasn't no activities or anything. And I said, well, if you could do anything, what would you want to do? And he goes, well, I like to run. And so I thought, what the heck? I called the school and I asked for who's your track coach? And I told him about this little boy. And, I said, if you want to follow up, it would be great. I don't know what his response would be, blah, blah, blah. Well, he got on he was on the track team, and it was wonderful. I'd go watch him, and bring the grandmother and her daughters. And I mean, it was just a little thing, but, for him, it turned into something to do at school. So, to your points about, helping them find their way, because they also need to have FUN, Yeah. And so I really think that's important.
And I don't think it's a little thing, I mean, it's huge for a kid. I mean, really, that's incredible.
I put this up because Dr. Rose Jones speaks to my class every now and then, and she is the researcher at the Perot Museum now, and she worked at Children's Medical Center. She has a PhD in anthropology. She talks to us about cultural issues, and she is on our podcast. She has recorded her story, what she went through. And one of the things she tells the class is that you may only be there for one semester with this child, but there could be one little thing, this is her pearl of wisdom, that you do that makes a difference. And she had a caseworker tell her, hey, you're smart. And nobody else ever did. And she has a PhD. So keep them running.
I just had two things that I wanted to mention. The first thing that stood out was, I think it's a huge accomplishment, aging out of foster care, enrolling in college, and finishing college. That's huge. I didn't hear anything about them accessing their educational benefits, tuition waiver or educational training voucher, so I was just curious about that.
That's in some of them, but these are just pieces of the whole.
Okay. And then my other one was, there is a foster care liaison assigned to every school district. So I know it's been around for just several years, so probably they weren't around when we had that. So when I heard Josie talk about becoming an educator and getting the people together, in our district, we do have every school district in Texas has a foster care liaison, and one of the things we try to do is, first of all, identify them and get them together. Transitional services is a huge thing, how to walk them through applying for college, taking them on college tours, and things like that. My question to the youth, I guess, in future podcasts would be, what's the best way to offer those services? Because a lot of them don't want to be outed out So when we form support groups or whatever we want to do, we always have best intentions of, oh, let's do this because this is what they need. But a lot of them really do not want to be outed. So we try to be very careful of how we provide services in the school settings without it being, oh, well, this is not a foster youth club or foster care club, nothing like that. And we do the same thing with homeless. But that's a huge thing that in maybe an idea what could have helped them along the way at the high school level in helping them transition if they would have had that.
Just from speaking to all the youth that we've gathered interviews with, I do know that a lot of them have a major distrust with people in the system. Like just last week, I was talking to a girl who said that her counselor at her RTC would share the details of their counseling sessions with staff, and then it would just get around to the whole group. So I do think that it is very important to foster that level of trust, and that takes time.
But we can add that question.
Yeah.
We'll start asking them. Thank you. Anyone else? Well, I'm sorry.
What's the name of the podcast?
Here it comes. There it is, and out. We have flyers around. Nikki, tell them how to do it.
So we are, as of Friday, officially in iTunes. So if you open the podcast app and you search Aged Out Project, we should be like the first or second result. Please subscribe to us. If you search Aged Out, we're also in there. That's the image that you'll see when you search for us. We will be in Spotify and potentially Google Play within the coming weeks. So if you are not an iTunes person, please follow us on Facebook or Twitter. All of our social medias are under Aged Out Project. So if you see that image, you're in the right place. Give us a like and we will keep you updated. We'll be releasing episodes about once a month or so. And we've recorded quite a few interviews by now, so we have a lot of material. But yeah.
Thank you very much. Cookies and coffee now.